So looking at adaptive immunity, this is also known as specific or acquired immunity, but this refers to the body's ability to defend itself against specific invading antigens. So this is how your body would attack very specific antigens. And when we talk about antigens, this is just something that your body recognizes as a foreign substance that also provokes immune responses, and we will go into more detail about what an antigen is in another video. There are two branches of the adaptive or specific or acquired immunity, and they are the cell-mediated branch and the antibody or humoral immunity, it's also called, branch. So looking at an overall image summary, this is the formation of immune cells of adaptive immunity from what we call pluripotent stem cells that are located in red bone marrow. As we've mentioned previously, all of those lymphocytes are created in the red bone marrow. But your B cells, that are the cells of mature or humoral immunity, mature in the bone marrow, and the T cells move from the bone marrow, they're the cells of cell-mediated immunity, to the thymus to become mature. The mature T cells mature into two types, cytotoxic T cells and helper T cells. And the mature B cells move into plasma cells that secrete antibodies, and both actually also make memory cells so that they can remember the antigen later and they can have a better arsenal of attacks against it. So this is the idea also behind things like vaccinations. There are little markers that are on the T cells. You see CD8 and CD4. These are proteins. It's kind of like your cytotoxic T cells and your helper T cells have a name tag. And then they will also, memory cells, stay around for a long time, and then they form what we call clones. And we'll look at what's called clonal selection in another video, but they can clone themselves to make new ones when you are infected with that same pathogen again, so that they can have a much faster and more efficient immune response every time. As we said, both the B lymphocytes, or otherwise known as B cells or plasma cells, or T cells or T lymphocytes, are made in the red bone marrow, which is a primary lymphatic organ. B cells stay in the red bone marrow to become immunocompetent and learn their job. T cells leave the red bone marrow and go to the thymus, where they learn to do their job. So I think of it as they are both born in the bone marrow. B cells stay at a community college. T cells travel out of state and go to a different university to learn how to do their job. And then when they know how to do their job, they can stay there or go to secondary lymphatic organs, which, as we've discussed previously, are all the other lymphatic organs such as lymph nodes, spleen, other areas in the body, mucosal and gut-associated lymphatic tissue. And they can there carry out their job. So they are sites for defense against invaders and cancer cells. So the humoral, or also known as antibody-mediated immunity, is mediated by your B cells or B lymphocytes, and they can turn into plasma cells and memory cells. The active cells of humoral immunity are plasma cells, and that is because they largely are attacking antigens that are not within red blood cells or hiding inside of them, so not virally infected cells, not transplanted cells, not cancer cells, but more extracellular pathogens, we call them, outside the cell or in the plasma. And they are mediated by antibodies which tag these foreign particles. The memory cells will remember that antigen and permit more rapid responses on subsequent exposures when we create those clones, and they can secrete appropriate antibodies. So humoral immunity is effective against extracellular pathogens, things outside the cell. These are extracellular bacteria. There are many types. Viruses, which always live in the cells, and also fungi that are not inside cells. This also would be good against other eukaryotic pathogens such as worm-like pathogens. Cell-mediated immunity is the opposite. This is regulated by T cells or T lymphocytes that mature in the thymus, and it is going to attack self cells that are abnormal, and this may be a bacteria inside a cell, a virally infected cell, a transplanted cell, a cancer cell. There are two types. There are CD4, which we saw that was a name tag it looked like on what we call a helper T cell, and CD8, which was like a name tag on a cytotoxic T cell. So what happens in the innate immune response, which we've talked about in a previous video, is a macrophage will ingest an antigen nonspecifically, and then it will present that to a helper T cell. And the helper T cells end up recruiting these cytotoxic T cells, which have an arsenal against some of those intracellular pathogens. So cell-mediated and humoral immunity both have memory cells. They are both very specific for specific types of antigens, but they work differently. Humoral immunity works more on extracellular pathogens, cell-mediated intracellular pathogens, and self cells, which are proven to be abnormal.